So clinical data management industry is all about conducting basically, as we know currently, vaccine or vaccine trials are being conducted across the globe by various pharmaceutical industries to come up with vaccination to fight with the COVID situation we are in. So the data that gets collected while these trials are conducted are basically uh, kind of done in an electronic format that gets cleaned and then further submitted to various authorities for approvals, and then get the drug gets approved. So as you know, I think Pfizer recently got express approval for their vaccine in Britain, that is UK. Similarly, the other companies are also have gone ahead and asked for expedited approvals for various vaccines that they have produced. So basically, this clinical data management industry deals with the collection of data, its verification, entry, validation, and the quality control aspects of the data that gets gathered during the conduct of a clinical trial. So what is exactly clinical trial is all about? So clinical trial is nothing but, if, as you know, in the drug discovery life cycle, we start with lab activities to identify a suitable candidate of a drug that probably then first administered to animals for preclinical trials. Then you go for approvals to various regulatory authorities for testing into humans, followed by various phases of clinical trials that get conducted. And last but not the least is the FDA approval for NDA approval for new drug and the post-marketing surveillance, the drug discovery process in brief. So the data management is nothing but throughout this life cycle of drug discovery at various point in times, be it clinical trials, clinical trials, you have to collect data on subject testing where we are doing it on using the investigational drug. So this data that gets collected via something called as case report form. So case report form is nothing but a history of information collecting tool where information, for example, a blood pressure of of a subject, or visit or a dosing data, concomitant medications being provided to the subject, if there are any adverse events that are observed while the drug is being administered. So all of this data is critically reviewed and collected using something called as case report form. In historically, we were capturing all of this data using something called as a paper case report form. So physically, the investigating sites were capturing this data in a physical form. They used to write all the information, scan these documents, and send it across to a vendor who used to process the data, and then it used to come to the data management team for further processing. While we collect all of this data and all humans are involved in collecting and processing data, it tends to kind of sometimes create inaccuracies in reading the data basis the protocol requirements. So as I mentioned, protocol. So protocol is a key document that tabulates how exactly the clinical trial should be conducted. What are the objectives of this particular clinical trial? What are we going to do in terms of administering the dose, at what frequency dose would be given, at what frequency the other parameters assessments would be carried out. Say for example, if the drug is let's say cardiovascular drug, so you need to have ECGs monitored throughout the life cycle of the clinical trials. So at what frequencies you would capture the data for ECG. So all of this information is tabulated in a document called as protocol, which talks about all requirements to capture the information. It also talks about safety efficacy requirements and the overall end result objectives that we are going to aim while we conclude the trial. So this protocol kind of becomes a Bible, I would say, a reference document for all the industry members who work on that particular clinical trial to go back and understand what exactly are the requirements. Are we following the expectations which are written down in the document? And at the same time, the safety and efficacy, safety of patient and efficacy of drug is being monitored or not. So the last point on this slide I have mentioned is especially from a point of view of how this particular information that gets collected is kind of creating impact on the availability of drug, and how this helps in the end result of what we usually typically do in the drug discovery cycle. So end result is nothing but the data management helps in review and approval of the data, that helps in submission requirements for any new drugs for regulatory approvals by regulatory agencies. And the basis of all of this is to ensure that the integrity of the clinical data is managed vis-a-vis what's there in the protocol, what are regulatory requirements that we have. So that's basically the clinical data management. Okay. I think I already mentioned what the clinical trial is all about and what are the various phases. So, and as part of the pharmacology, I would say subject, all of you would have in your careers while you were students or currently undergoing education would have gone through the drug discovery process and various phases of trial. So I'll not repeat this point again. Uh, so moving on to kind of giving you a picturization or pictorial view of what exactly are these dots that are getting connected. So as I mentioned, once a protocol is defined after the preclinical trials are done and the approval is available from authorities to conduct the trials in humans. So we write a document called as protocol, like I mentioned. So once this protocol is identified, it talks about what kind of patients are needed to be enrolled in the study so that we can evaluate the safety and efficacy parameters at various phases of trials, whether it is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 or phase 4. So once we start identifying subject requirements, we would enroll various sites across the globe. So for example, if it is a multi-center, multi-country trial, so we would ensure that subject recruitment happens at various designated sites that have been shortlisted by sponsor. So once these patients are enrolled, they are subjected to something called as informed consent form. So what is informed consent form? So this form talks about various understandings of protocol requirement and how the drug that is being given to the subject, whether there were any adverse event, adverse reactions that were already known, and if known, we are providing that all information to subject. So subject is giving us consent to administer this particular drug to the drug while undergoing the treatment for that particular disease or disorder as an investigational drug. So once subjects are enrolled, the investigator regularly asks subjects to come for visits, capture the data on something called as case report form, like I mentioned. So there is a team of clinical operations monitor who reviews the source data that is getting collected, let's say on various forms or various reports, and that transcribes into your electronic capture system. We call it as a CDMS system, clinical data management system. This clinical data management system is nothing but a technological advancements that we have done from the time when we started working on paper CRFs to the electronic format. So so I would say this is more of a digitalization of the paper CRFs that we have carried out. So there are various tools that help capture this particular data for us. There is a tool called as Oracle Clinical. There is a tool called as Medidata Rave that helps us capture this data. So once this data gets captured, then the role of a clinical data manager comes into picture, who according to protocol identifies whether the data that is getting captured is appropriate basis the requirements that we have identified in protocol. If not, then the data manager goes back to, let's say, investigator asking for more information, more clarity on data. If there is inconsistencies observed, so query would be raised stating that this data is inaccurate and can you provide appropriate information looking at the source data. So that's the CDM team, like you see on the screen, with a designation called as data manager. So they deal with talking to the investigator, the clinical operations team, also to the third party vendors who help collect the samples and process them, at the end of days sending across the results. So this is a, I would say, critical link in the clinical trial management that we are talking about here. So once this data processing is completed, this data is further then shared with someone called as clinician or a medical monitor of a study, who reviews the data from a medical standpoint for its accuracy, accuracy of data and correctness of data. At the end of the day, this data is now then fed to a person called a statistician. I'm sure everyone one of us have gone through statistical analysis tools and techniques while we were doing our mathematics as one of our subjects, maybe preliminary information. So these statisticians then look at the data, compare it with the protocol defined requirements of various objectives that we have initially jotted down while we started working on study. So they compare the data to see whether the objectives of the study that we identified at the beginning of the study assignment are being met, and if they feel that it's meeting basis the quality control step that we have incorporated, they would help produce the document called as CSR. So CSR is a document that gets then shared with the regulatory authorities, and then basis the review of this CSR document, the regulatory authorities would compare it to the protocol requirements, and if they feel or if they're satisfied with the results that are produced during the life cycle of a study, they would give an approval for drug to be marketed in the industry. So this talks about brief understanding of what the how is the flow of the data right from when we start recruiting subjects to moving to the investigator, they transcribe the data, data manager works on the cleaning of data, provides that information to statistician, and that gets submitted to the regulatory authorities. So moving on to talking about clinical data management and overview topic that we have already started. So what is the exact importance of clinical data manager in this particular, I would say, jigsaw puzzle, the way we have picturized it here? As you have seen, there are a lot of to and fro communications and contacts that this particular data manager has. So you can easily identify, looking at this pictorial representation, how critical this person is in ensuring that the trial is being smoothly run and the data that's getting captured is being provided to the regulatory authorities basis the requirements. So what we exactly do in CDM world. So the important aspect is to help ensure or provide consistent, accurate, and valid clinical data. When I say valid, so validation is nothing but validation of the data being collected vis-a-vis what's mentioned in the protocol. So if protocol, say for example, states that your trial has to be conducted on adult patients. So any patient that is getting enrolled in a study should have an age of 18 and above. Any subject below 18 years of age shouldn't be recruited in trial. So that is a validation of what is the requirement in your protocol, and are we kind of adhering to the adhering to the protocol requirements is what we typically do in clinical data management. I'll take you through in terms of what the quality aspects are being monitored and how we really do that. But this is to just give you gist of what the validation in terms of clinical data means. So it also helps to support accuracy of final conclusions and the report. So when we say final conclusions, it is nothing but the objectives of a study. So for example, if there's a hypertension a drug that is being tested, so probably the objective of that particular drug has to reduce the blood pressure in individuals who are hypertensive. Okay, so, and it would also talk about reduction by, let's say, 20% or 30% of the current threshold that these subjects are going through. So if the blood pressure is around 140, 200, just a hypothetical example, across, let's say, 100 subjects that we are trying to recruit, the objective of this particular trial would be to reduce this blood pressure, let's say, by 20% or 30% once we start administering the investigational drug. So basis these objectives that are defined for each of the drugs, whether it is an oncology trial, whether it is cardiovascular trial or a diabetic trial, these objectives are upfrontly defined. So and basis the data that gets collected, we have to make sure that the objectives that we define at the beginning of trial are being met when we are sending across final conclusions and the reports to regulatory authorities. So CDM or data management basically helps to ensure that the overall objectives of the trials are being met when we carry out the trial. The CDM also ensures that the collected data is complete and accurate. So many times, say for example, if we have recruited a subject who is 70 years old for a oncology trial, and we are expected to capture data of the medical history of this particular subject. When we say medical history can be as back as, let's say, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, as it is related to the investigational drug, we'll have to start capturing that data. So if subject is 70 years old, it may happen that the subject is not able to recollect the information when, let's say, there was a specific surgery this person has undergone. So the dates of these surgeries may not be as accurate as we wanted. So there would be requirements that we would start defining, looking at the protocol requirements in terms of how we can accurately capture this data. We can go to as accurately capturing the data as possible. Say for example, if only year is known, or if only month and year is known, we will still capture that data to make it more accurate, if not an exact date on which this particular surgery was carried out. So accuracy plays an important role in terms of capturing this data, because there is a lot of relevance of any information that gets captured, be it medical history, like I mentioned, be it demographic data, be it any concomitant medication the subject has been taking in past for various other requirements, not just, let's say, for an oncology study, but any other comorbidities this particular patient has, because there would be any drug and drug interaction that are being observed. So all this data capturing techniques or mechanisms play an important role in various analytical methods that are being employed by the statisticians when looking at the data. So if you have seen any drug prescription, or sorry, the let's say any uh, bottle of liquid drug that's being prescribed, you would see a leaflet that talks about various critical information. So the the information that gets captured in these leaflets, as they are known, it's coming from the data that gets captured through the life cycle of a study. So to talk about drug-drug interaction, to talk about any adverse events that probably might be observed while the drug is being administered. So if the subject is pregnant, then the subject should be the drug should be avoided during pregnancy. So all these requirements come from the clinical data that gets captured and the analysis that we carry out afterwards. So that's talking about what CDM ensures. So last but not least, what CDM also ensures is the trial database. So when I say trial database, before I conclude this particular point, so when I say trial database, like I mentioned, there are various tools and systems that we regularly use in our CDM industry. They are called as CDMS system, clinical data management system. So like I mentioned, Oracle Clinical, or even the Ray Data are some of the tools that we use. So this tool is nothing but a database for us, because this database helps capture the information in a secure and valid environment. So we have to ensure this particular database, that where this data is getting captured, having complete and accurate data. At the same time, it is sufficiently clean to ensure that the statistical analysis or statistician group gets the key requirements out of the data that is being cleaned, captured. So the end result, let's say, our end customer for us as clinical data management associates is the statistician group, because we have to feed our information that gets captured in data to them in most accurate, precise, and as clean and as validated format as possible, because they are the ones who are going to analyze that data further for submission to regulatory authorities. Before I move further, are there any questions anyone has? Anything that's not clear?
I urge all participants to ask your questions at this point of time.
Or if you feel, if you want to interrupt me and ask any question, even that works for me. Otherwise, we can take questions at the end of the session. Assuming there are no questions, I'll move on. So this again, pictorial representation helps us understand what we have already spoken about. The data cleaning is governed by data management team. There are biostatisticians who are kind of end customers for us. But there's another critical group that also helps us making sure that the validations I mentioned, or accuracy of data, or uh, inaccuracy of data for that matter, how we have to define it, how we have to analyze this data, is governed by people called as clinical programmers. So these are nothing but database designers, I would say, coming from, let's say, background of SAS certification, PLSQL language writing, C code writing. So you can assume that these are individuals who have completed their, let's say, computer science educations and are coming into programming, clinical data management program industry. So this is another key, I would say, group that helps us in making sure that the protocol requirements that we have defined to capture the data are kind of designed in the CDMS systems we spoke about, whether it is Oracle Clinical or whether it is Medidata Rave we spoke about. Say, for example, your protocol requires that the subject, as I mentioned, the subject recruitment should happen only for adult patients. Okay, so the programmer has a requirement that we would define as data managers, that when we try to capture, let's say, demography data for various subjects, it should throw a query stating that a subject that has been recruited, his or her age is below 18 years of age. So if these kind of queries are identified when the data gets captured in system, then it would give an alert, let's say, to data managers as well as investigators who are capturing this data in system, stating that the subject recruited recently in a specific study is not fulfilling the requirements of the protocol. So these programmers are really helping us in coding these requirements compared to protocol, and that helps in making sure that the quality requirements of study, or accuracy of data, or for that matter compliance to protocol is being met regularly. So there is another team, like I mentioned, programmers, who help us in making sure that the smooth conduct of study happens regularly throughout the life cycle. So that brings us to a point, how we ensure that the quality of data, or data that is getting captured, is quality proof, and basis what requirements we are defining these qualities. So when we start working on a
Excuse me.
study defining what are, yeah,
Can I please interrupt? I just want to clarify one thing. When we are talking about clean data,
okay.
is it like only
Mhm.
is the data according to protocol or not? I- Is it the meaning of clean data, or do we need to have some more parameters are there to be considered before we just pass this data to the statisticians? We said it should
Right.
be a clean data. Can you please
Correct.
elaborate what do we exactly mean by this clean data?
Yes. So clean data, like you rightly said, the clean data concept comes from what are the protocol requirements. So protocol itself helps us in understanding what are going to be the requirements to capture data, in what format, in what type of information is needed to be captured. So protocol is the basis or theory on which we try to clean our data that is getting captured. There's no other regular, I mean, there is no other requirement apart from protocol driven requirement that defines what should be the definition of clean data. I mean, there are other things like GCP guidelines or good clinical practices guidelines that have to be followed, but they are more generic in nature when we are talking about specific study in question. So protocol itself helps us define what are our cleaning requirements basically. So there is another document that we help create basis the protocol requirement, that is called as data management plan or data quality management plan. So this document again references a lot of information from protocol itself, defining how we have to ensure the data that is getting captured is clean. And the definition of clean data is basically coming from the protocol requirements, nothing else.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other question on similar lines or anything not clear then I can touch base on that. Okay, I hope there isn't a question on this topic. So moving on to quality management aspects. So as we have discussed in last 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I would say, what exactly is the data management? So this particular, I would say, important puzzle in the jigsaw is so critical and so important that there are a lot of members who are dependent on the work that we do as clinical data managers. The reason why it is more important for us to be more vigilant, or probably gatekeepers. You can say that data managers are nothing but gatekeepers of data, to make sure that it feeds into the CDMS system basis what's defined in protocol, and the output goes to regulatory authorities, helping us to achieve the stated objectives at the beginning of trial for approvals for that particular drug for wider use in the market. So the quality assurance and quality control steps are two key activities that we regularly do while we start capturing the information while study begins. So quality assurance is nothing but overall data management plan that I referenced earlier. It is a document that helps us to ensure integrity of our data, especially the systems that we use in capturing the information. The quality control is nothing but series of measurements used to assess quality of data by using various tools and techniques that are governed in our system. So to a point which Ms. Mansi asked earlier, there are other things that we also reference called as SOPs or data cleaning guidelines that are also supplement to the data management plan I mentioned here. So data management plan is kind of, I would say, from a data management point of view, it becomes Bible for us for referencing anything and everything when it comes to there. If there is any doubt in terms of what exactly are the steps I have to encompass to ensure that the clean data is, data is clean and further sent for analysis. So protocol becomes Bible for the entire clinical research team. So that includes not just data managers, but other stakeholders like statisticians, clinical programmers. There's clinical operations team, medical monitors. So all of them reference protocol more. But when it comes to data managers, we reference a document called as data management plan, or a data quality management plan, DQMP or DMP. You can acronym that particular document. So data management plan again references basically the protocol itself, but it also references the SOPs that govern the generic requirements from the GCDMP or overall industry standards. And that helps us to put together series of quality control and quality assurance steps while we work on data management activities. So what are various attributes of the quality? So what we have to ensure is the accuracy of data. So for example, like I've given an example of blood pressure that getting measured. So whether the blood pressure getting measured, let's say for a patient who is 21 years old, and there is no other history of hypertension that he has or his family has. But despite that fact, let's say the blood pressure measurement at a specific visit has been captured as 160 to 20 HBP and LBP. So whether this is really an accurate information or not, because the subject with just 21 years old without any history of hypertension for himself or a family, is this data that has been captured is accurate or not? It might also happen that there was another subject who was 33 years old, and both of them came for a visit at the same time, and the nurse who was kind of checking the blood pressure has kind of switched data between these two subjects and captured the information incorrectly. So we'll have to be vigilant to ensure that the data that is getting captured is accurate or not for that particular subject. If there are no other historical information available stating that this subject might be hypertensive. The data also needs to be consistent. Say, for example, if subject is coming for a visit for administering a dose. So let's say today is the date, and I am a subject, for example, taking the vaccine, let's say a co-vaccine. So when I'm coming for a visit, the visit should capture the date when I have come to the site for visit. At the same time, it also should capture the date when this particular vaccine was administered. So when this data comes to CDM, for example, taking this particular example, that I visited a hospital today on 8th of December, and the vaccine was also given on 8th of December. But when capturing this information in system, the clinical operations team captured it with wrong date. That's 8 being the visit date and 9th being the date when the vaccine was provided. So this is the wrong data. If the subject has come for visit and the dosing is given, then there has to be consistency between these two dates. So that is coming from a requirement to have consistency across various interlinked information. Timeline. So a lot of time, take an example, let's say of a blood sugar. So blood sugar has to be captured at two various frequencies, one being a fasting and one being postprandial. So when I'm working on a diabetic trial, and if the information for the glucose values captured, requirement is fasting, but the values provided, sorry, the sampling that was collected was postprandial, it doesn't make sense, right? So if protocol says that you need to collect the fasting blood sugar, then you need to collect fasting blood sugar. You cannot ask subject to eat and come and then help collect the blood sample for a PP requirement. So timelines are important. At what frequency, whether it is pre-dose or a post-dose, data collection of specific tests or samples is important. The next is completeness of data. As I mentioned, another previous example of a subject who was 70 years old and there was a surgery that was carried out for that particular subject. Let's say it was a angioplasty or angiography that was done, let's say 10, 15 years back or 20 years back, but he is unable to recollect information on what exact date this particular surgery was carried out. So we have to try and ensure that at least the month and the year of that particular surgery is captured, if not exactly the day when it was captured. I also gave a reference to a example of relevance of data, like subject population in a study states that the only adult subjects have to be enrolled, and there's a subject who is 17 years old. So it's not meeting the requirements of the study recruitment or inclusion criteria. So the data is not making sure that it's relevant to the protocol requirements. So these are some of the key attributes that we have to ensure while working on data management activities. I also have just given you a screenshot of how typically a case report form looks like. This is a PDF version of what exactly gets captured in an electronic format. You can consider, let's say, for example, if you want to open a Gmail account. So Gmail, while you open a Gmail account, they would ask key relevant information. You give your name, your middle name, your surname, your age, say, for example, what country you come from, your phone number. All this information gets captured when you create an account in Gmail. So this case report form is exactly a replica of the same system. But the only thing is that this ECRF is more regulated or more governed by the regulatory requirements the industry has defined. Not everyone gets access to this particular database. Only authorized members get access to this particular database. So that's how it looks like when we try to enter information for various key attributes or key requirements of a study across all visits and across all activities. So what exactly are some of the measures that we put across while ensuring the quality control and assurance of this quality are being done? So first and foremost comes the source data verification. So when I mentioned that, let's say investigator has asked, let's say 10 subjects to come for a visit where they are capturing, let's say lab samples, they're also administering drug. So there are a lot of things that are going on at that particular visit. So all of this is getting captured, let's say in lab reports or some notes where this information is being captured. And once this is getting captured, the clinical operations team then transcribe this raw information or source information into a database, which I showed you earlier. So if a subject has come for a first visit on a study, what we typically would like to understand is what is the date of birth of a subject, what is the gender of subject, what is the ethnicity. So this doesn't get captured directly in the database. It gets captured, let's say, in a source form, and this source form can be anything, any notes that are being written while this information gets captured. And once these physical notes are transcribed into database, so there is human intervention. So since there is human intervention, there is possibility that the transcription is not happening the way it's written on the notes. So there has to be a third person doing a source data verification. So that ensures the data captured in the source itself is getting verified before it comes to data management team for further activities. The other things that we also do is something called a standards library. So for an oncology trial, or let's say a diabetic trial, or any trial that you consider, the demography information that we've seen in the previous slide, the ECRF, these requirements are not going to change, right? Because you would always want to capture information in terms of the age, the ethnicity, the gender, whether the patient is pregnant, let's say at this stage. So this data capture requirement is not going to change across any study that you do, whether it is a vaccine trial, whether it is diabetic trial, whether it is oncology trial. So this becomes a standard requirement across studies, and not just for specific sponsor, but across the industry, because any organization conducting trial would want to understand this information first, right? So the industry itself has evolved a lot in last 10-15 years to make sure that we have standards in place to capture critical data that's needed across studies across industry. So we have defined standards using something called a C disk or C dash. You might have heard these terms. If not, maybe you can Google it and you would understand what these terms are. So these are the organization that has, or maybe all organization came together to form this particular group called as C disk, who in turn have helped us in defining the standard requirements for the entire industry. So we ensure that the standard libraries are used to capture this standard data. There might be some study specific needs that we may come across that are needed from a protocol point of view. So that becomes a non-standard requirement, but these requirements are just 20% of what we typically work on. The next steps are the data cleaning activities, which us as data managers do. So what we do in data cleaning, there are two checks that we have put in place. First one is a system check. So as you've seen this particular ECRF screen. So in here, for example, if you try to put, let's say subject is recorded as male, but for the visit one itself, there is a pregnancy test form also, which is being captured as pregnancy test completed. So there is inaccuracies. You're reporting subject as male, but there's a pregnancy test that is getting captured. So it is inconsistent data or inaccurate data, because you cannot have pregnancy test done for a male subject. So this becomes the system generated check. So we will write programs that would try to understand if there are these interlinked inaccuracies in system. It would throw up an error when we try to enter information on a pregnancy page. It would say that the subject is a male and you're trying to capture pregnancy details for a male subject, whether it is right or wrong. So that gives us a trigger whether the data getting entered is correct or not. So these are system checks. So each of the CRF has these checks defined. We call it as edit checks. So when we are trying to edit the information, it will throw up a check stating that the information you are trying to capture is not accurate as per the provisions of protocol, or as per the provisions of general data management activities. There are some checks which are more complex in nature, which cannot be captured in using the system checks. For that, we'll have to do something called as manual review of data to understand whether the data that has been captured is correct or not. So we go for something called as manual check to understand the information, and then we would raise a query in the database stating that XYZ information that you have captured. Say, for example, there is a serious adverse event and subject has died. So typically, basis the standard requirement, death it cannot be reported as an adverse event term. When I say adverse event term, you can consider hypertension to be an adverse event term. You can consider diabetes mellitus as a disease as a adverse event term. So what has to be captured is the underlying cause of a death. So the subject might have died because of the comorbidity complications arising out of, let's say, the subject had COVID and there was a COPD exacerbation that was observed. So COPD becomes an underlying disease because of which subject has died. So COPD should get captured in as an adverse event rather than death. So this cannot be done in an electronic system check format. So we'll have to raise a manual query stating that this data is inaccurate and please correct or please provide a underlying cause. There are two more things that we regularly do is interim analysis and the database log. So what is interim analysis? While typically phase 3 trials run for many years, okay, when they run for at least 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, throughout this life cycle of, let's say, phase 3 trial, when we are trying to, let's say, thousands of subjects, at some point in time, we have to ensure or we have to assess whether the objective that we have defined at the beginning of study so far is being met or not. So halfway through the trial, we have to understand by doing an interim analysis of the entire data to assess whether the study is on track or not. So at this stage, when we have done the analysis and the review, as we do it for the database log, if we realize that there are no benefits that the subjects are getting out of the drug that is being administered, so is there a point to continue this trial for next 2.5 years of time that we have defined in protocol? So if all the team members of a study come to a conclusion that it's not making sense to continue the trial, the trial gets concluded at that stage and there is no more drug being administered to various patients. And it may so happen a lot of time that these go no go decisions are done basis the interim analysis. And last but not the least is the database log. When this is a time when the protocol defined fag end of a study comes to conclusion, where we try to when we have already captured all the data. So this is a stage where we have to clean entire data, let's say of 1,000 subjects, if it is a phase 3 trial, to make sure that all these 1,000 subjects and the data that we have collected for all these 1,000 subjects is as clean as possible, is as accurate as possible, in and is as validated as possible compared to the protocol or the data quality management plan. So that's a stage where the role of a data manager ceases to exist, because after this stage, the data then feeds into the statistician team, who then analyzes the data and then sends across that data further to a regulatory authority basis the needs. So all of this is governed by a data quality management plan, as we have discussed in last 15-20 minutes. So this becomes a critical document that helps us define how we have to ensure the quality control is established for all data that gets captured. So next is an important slide. So, but before I move on to that slide, are there any questions anyone has in terms of what we spoke about, overall clinical data management or the quality control or the data cleaning or quality assurance of the data that we spoke about? Okay, I take it as no. So the next slide. Okay, so next slide talks about what all opportunities that we have in this particular industry, because I think this is one of an industry, though growing, has been alien to the academia, as I have known probably from my own experience. I started working in CIPLA, and prior to that, I have also worked as a sales representative. But clinical management industry or clinical research industry itself was alien to me even 10 years ago. And probably same is the case now also, because there's not a lot of awareness about what this industry is all about, what exactly is done. Though there is a lot of information available in our academic course of academic courses, but there is a lot of gaps, I would say, that are there in terms of understanding whether the education that you guys as B farms and farms are doing, is it really kind of creating an impact or is relevant when we have to step into, let's say, clinical research industry. Is only B farm sufficient to get to the job of a clinical data manager, or do I have to do anything else? So there is a lot of confusion, a lot of, I would say, inaccurate information floating around while I was speaking to your Professor Preeti and some of my other friends from my batches in other academia also. So I also thought of kind of giving you a brief understanding of what this industry is all about and what kind of job this particular industry has to offer for B Farm, M Farm graduates, and what opportunities are lined up in this industry. So as we spoke about data management, so this is one of a core, I would say, role in clinical research industry. So in order to get into a data management job, the B Farm graduation or M Farm graduation is sufficient, because we have a lot of exposure that we get while we study, B Farm subjects or M Farm subjects, pharmacology, uh, or pharmacognosy for that matter, uh, chemistry for that matter, becomes more core subjects that are needed to understand how this industry works. So even if you are a B Farm graduate or M Farm graduate, and if you're not done a clinical research course, it's still fair for you to get into a clinical data management job, because once you get into a job, there would be trainings that are given to you. There would be overview of this industry that would be provided to you. So even if there is a disconnect between what's taught, let's say, while we study and what exactly happens in the industry, this particular gap gets covered in initial 2 to 3 months of training that an organization imparts to any new member that joins the group. Okay. So don't worry, even if there is a job, let's say, which talks about clinical data manager, one role, and if this is for fresher, please go ahead and apply. I would say that, because don't be under an impression that you really don't know about anything on for the data management, but the organization also has structure in place that helps you to kind of understand the role in better fashion and allow you to succeed in your job. So clinical research course is a plus point, I would say. I myself have done that. A post graduation diploma in clinical research is something that I did 10 11 years ago. So there are various organizations that provide this particular course. So if you are B Farm, M Farm, and you want to get into this particular industry, you can also go ahead and have this particular course done. That gives you more advantage when you secure a job, because you are already coming with 6 8 months of academic knowledge of the data management industry. There's another vertical called as pharmacovigilance. So this particular department purely deals with all the safety information of a study, safety data information of a study. So safety data is nothing but when we administer a drug, the subject might have other comorbidities in place, or the same investigational drug that he has or she has taken might lead to some of the issues, some of the adverse reactions or interventions. So all of this should get captured in a database which is called as safety database. So this particular group purely deals with cleaning of just safety data, nothing else. Okay, but again, a B Farm or an M Farm graduate can easily work within a pharmacovigilance department as well, because pharmacology knowledge becomes predominant when you work on safety data, because it's all about adverse event information or a serious adverse information that you'll have to deal with. It captures as much and as more detailed information when it comes to serious adverse events. So even if you're a graduate or a postgraduate, you can easily get into a pharmacovigilance department. And again, clinical research course is kind of plus point. It's not required that you have to do a clinical research course, but that gives you the perspective. I earlier also spoke about a role called as clinical programmers. So these are basically members who are kind of well versed in coding of the data. There's a certification called as SAS certification that helps you probably. Uh, I mean, you need not have to be a computer science graduate to work as a clinical programmer. Even if you're a B Farm graduate and if you have done a SAS certification as an additional, I would say, skill, with that skill also you would be able to get into a clinical programming job. It's not that there is a core programming knowledge is required. Let's say, for example, C++, C plus language. These type of language knowledge is not customer, I mean, important or required when you have to take up a clinical programming job. So SAS certification, if you have done that, there's, I mean, if you Google the SAS certification, it will help you. There are two certification, base SAS and advanced SAS. So even if you do one of them, that will help you to secure a clinical programmer job. Since there are a lot of members that are involved in making sure that the trial is run smoothly, there is a role that is required of a project manager. Okay, because this particular person governs the entire, I would say, all the verticals we spoke about earlier. So this there's a certification called as project management certification, PMP certification. So if you have done PMP certification in addition to being a BPharm MPharm, that adds a lot of value for you to get into a project management role within CDM industry. There's another group that purely deals with clinical operations work. So this role is basically more to do with traveling, going to various sites where subjects are getting recruited, where you would do verification of data, the source data being verified. You would also be involved in site selection. Say, for example, if there is a diabetic trial, then you would also help understand within Pune how many hospitals have very good diabetic patient population, and feed that data to the organization that can help, shortlisting that particular site. So clinical research, clinical operations role is more on 50% of travel requirements and 50% of being an office-based job. So that's on the clinical operations. And last but not the least is statistical programming. So I've seen some of my friends who have been BPharm graduate, and after that they have done MSc in biostats to get into this particular role, because statistical analysis is a core of this particular industry. The way the data management is core of validation requirements. So statistical analysis becomes core because these are the individuals who are going to help analyze and prepare data in such a fashion that would help us to understand whether the objectives of the trials were met or not. So if someone is a BPharm grad and have willingness to take up biostatistician role, so person can do an MSc biostats and get into the statistical programming activities, or work as a biostatistician for a study also. So these are some of the opportunities that are available in the CDM industry. And being a BPharm or an MPharm, you can take up any of these opportunities if they come your way. So don't hesitate, I would say, to get into this particular role, because typically when we do BPharm MPharm, we either go for research in labs, or we go for marketing, worst case scenario, or we go for production units, like any organization having production facilities. But CDM industry is one such industry that would give you a lot of assurance for your job, because it's more evolving and India is becoming more outsourced model, or outsourcing destination, I would say, because a lot of jobs have come to India in last 10 years time since I started my job as clinical data manager. There was a scarcity, non-availability of information. The institutes weren't there to kind of train us. There were only handful of them. But with last 10 years of time, I think there has been a lot of focus on giving these trainings out. There are a lot of institutes who are providing clinical research courses that help you out in understanding this industry more. So if you're really interested in these type of jobs, I would suggest these are some of the jobs opportunities that you have, and some of the skill requirements I mentioned here that can help you in terms of taking up these opportunities. Not just for the students on the call, maybe for the teachers also, who can help their students in understanding what the CDM industry is all about and what kind of opportunities are there in this industry. So I think that concludes the presentation or the topic I had. So are there any questions that you want me to help answer? We just have 1 minute, but I can definitely ask for any questions anyone has.
Can I please?
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
Sorry again to interrupt, but
no
then
problem.
I just want to know, there are lots of like organizations which are providing clinical research courses to the students.